Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're gonna go to a very special place. It's called the Fuji Motorsports Museum. And I'm just gonna show you where this is. This here is the west gate of Fuji Speedway, where normally you go in to attend races or for events. And that is the new building right beside it on the west side. And it's the new Fuji Speedway Hotel. And inside on the first and second floors is a very special museum that Toyota has made. It's called the Motorsports Museum. It's filled with over 130 years of car history. We're going to go inside and take a look. So let's go. So we open the doors, we're greeted by this wonderful and interesting looking motorsports related wall mural. As you can see, it's been intricately made. It's got all the words that's used in motorsports, such as downforce, transponder, one make car is dogfight, slipstream, and there are all these parts from, of course, I assume from some from race cars, some from road cars. You got an exhaust manifold here, a muffler over there, the crankcase, brake rotors, springs, the cylinder head, some underfloor bracings, propeller shaft made of carbon fiber probably, and it's just so expectantly gives that atmosphere of what we're going to see inside. Let's have a look. Oh, you step in, there's just this view of having this open space. Of course, this building is part of the Fuji Speedway Hotel, and the museum itself is only located on the first and second floors. It costs $1,600 if you book online to come in. If you come on the day itself, the tickets are available at the counter over there. It's $1,800 for adults, and they have guided tours, but it's only in Japanese. It's twice a day. We just went for one. We've got a lot of information about the car. Just right here in front of you is this Toyota 7. It's a 1960s LeMans car that Toyota raced. And apparently this is the one that didn't get to race. It's got the twin turbos, as we can see here. Just, in those days, it's just right attached to the exhaust, right behind here, directly outside. It's very raw. It's just built completely for speed. This apparently is a replica because they didn't manage to keep the original race car. The tires are from the actual period car, apparently. And there's all this attention to detail. Of course, now it is the Japanese New Year. We have a kind of a New Year decorations. This is something that's very traditionally used outside in shops. But if you see here, motorsports ways, it's got the carbon racing disc brakes. And look at this, even these little things, small details, huge, chassis bolts as a kind of a decoration. So we're ready to go in and have a look. So the moment we enter here, we're greeted with this. It's a 1899 Panhard Levasseur, which is actually France's oldest automobile maker. Now the reason why this is here is because back in the early 19th century, when the gas engine was still being researched on, people were thinking about, the engineers were thinking about steam engines, gasoline engines, there's also electric engines. But it didn't take until certain gasoline engine makers, such as Panhard and Mercedes-Benz, at the time just Benz and Daimler, was separate Ford, to prove that the gasoline engine, even though it was not that efficient, could have very good performance and run on roads, which at that time, of course, were not as developed as today. And which is why you see early cars, which are basically just motorized versions of horse carriages. As you see all these wooden wheels, which later became metal. And right here you see a very interesting spindle. This is actually the pioneer of the FR front engine rear drive system, something which you take for granted today, but which is something quite revolutionary, especially with a gearbox, a propeller shaft. But the propeller shaft only comes until this point here, where you can see it looks like a bicycle, what's called a motorcycle chain. And this is a partially restored originals. It's loaned from a French museum. Very amazing to see just all these things. Like over here, these look like radiator type heat diffusing things, and you know, just the way it's arranged, very different from even later cars, just 20, 30 years later, which you're going to see over here. This is an American car called the Thomas Flyer, 1909, and this is at the age where roads were still not paved, when they were very rough, and they needed high ground clearance. And the museum here just kind of almost forces you to go through history to see just how, you know, people and motoring were done in that time. The background pictures over there on the curtains, that's actually an old photograph of the Thomas Flyer coming to Japan, and since Japan had very narrow roads, it was almost the length of the road, very interestingly. And just look at this. It's a massive sedan, probably the size of a Lexus LS or a Mercedes S-Class. But imagine this, see this kind of thing with giant wheels. I mean, this looks like a very early SUV with its huge diameter with thin tires. But something very interesting is these. These were early headlights, but they weren't even electric. They were gas-fired. You can see inside there's the filaments for the gas, and there's a pipe running around the side here to a sort of a gas tank, and that's the spare wheel. And I just find it very interesting that, you know, it looks so rudimentary, very mechanical, these early machinery, these early cars. You have the gear shift, you know, everything, every piece of machinery gear is exposed. And, you know, the steering wheel shaft, of course, you know, windscreens were sort of an afterthought just to keep out bugs and things from flying into the driver. And the rear seat is where, you know, this is the carriage for, you know, you can imagine at that time, it was only, of course, used for the rich, or sort of like, you know, even maybe to carry aristocracy class. I'm just imagining, when I was not born at that time, obviously, but, you know, all things was a hand-built, coach-built, and, you know, you can see how this is the early type of ladder frame chassis where the bodies sit on top. And a lot of things, there weren't even things like brakes yet, you know. It was just like a shaft type of brake, and still using tires that were sort of close to bicycles. But Dunlop from the UK, he developed the first tubeless tire that was very strong, could run and withstand a lot of you know, driving on rough roads. And really, so you had France, which was, you know, a pioneer in the engineering in America, which also during the Industrial Revolution. And we come over here to this. This is another American car. It's called the Stutz Bearcat Series F. I've never heard of this car. It's so interesting to learn about it. Let's have a look. 1914, and this was actually a sports car, apparently described as the best sports car in the United States before World War I. And this is a prototype that participated in the Indiana 500-mile race in 1911. Now, there's something very interesting. This mechanism over here seems to be a what is listed here as a friction damper Orem ipsum. And so this is basically an early shock absorber used to dampen out the leaf spring effects, which you can see over here. Very interesting to see these early, obviously solid, rigid axles. They must have been very hard, you know, to go on the road. Oh, and one more thing. A lot of us forget and take for granted now that when we start the car, we push the button, we turn the key. But back then, you had this. You had to manually sort of just crank the engine really hard until it started. It was actually quite dangerous because, you know, it could catch fire. And it was a luxury back then because down here is a little lever that was actually the first sort of electric engine starter. Very interesting. And another thing, if you notice, is how long or how far the reach of the driver's seat to the pedals are. And this is obviously not a car built for shorter Asian or even Japanese people back then. You know, I think I'm 176 and I have to be at least that or taller to sort of, you know, ride in this car like that. And you just have a rudimentary fly screen over here. Everything's made of metal, leather, got wood, and a little box here to keep your stuff, gloves, whatever, wallet. You can just see how, you know, things are just placed. You got the trunk for your luggage. That's obviously the gas tank over there. And then coming to here is, as you see, looks very British. It is British racing green. This is a very minor maker back then, but then there was many car makers that a lot of us don't know. It is called the Sunbeam Grand Prix. It was actually made as a racing car, full Grand Prix car. And the Sunbeam was the first in the UK to adopt a state-of-the-art DOHC twin-cam 4-valve engine of the time. Now this is 1922, and the concept of having overhead valves in engines, of course at the time a lot of them were still using push rods, comes from the development of airplane engines. Now, the reason why automobile engines could advance so much, even in the early 20s pre-war, at the advent of World War I, was because a lot of car manufacturers were actually involved in building aircraft, specifically military aircraft. You had Bugatti, you had Alfa Romeo, you had BMW, Mitsubishi, of course the company of Subaru, even Mercedes-Benz, and all, you know, German companies, American companies, Japanese companies. And because, you know, safety in having the engine run and having power was very important in aircraft, that transplanted into road cars, and which was born the 4-valve. Of course, engineers already knew at that time, you know, the efficiency of this. And so this was apparently a very advanced engine. 2 liters, just something that we take for granted today. But have a look at this. It's a, you know, looks like an early Formula type car. This looks like a very tight 2-seater, and gear shift, stick shift time. So, you know, probably at that time was something very advanced. I had a shorter wheelbase and had drum brakes, the first appearance of drum brakes, which we also take for granted. Each wheel now had a drum brake, and the suspension also started to improve. You had a wishbone on top and, well, sort of rudimentary suspension below. You had, as you can see, a control arm inside there with some attempts to give sort of separate mechanisms and levers. You had a radiator, still had the crank starter. You know, so see this development, very interesting. 4-cylinder engine, a straight pipe exhaust coming through. So this was then, of course, other British makers like Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Jaguar. Of course, there's a Bentley upstairs if you go and have a look. Then over to Mr. Henry Ford, the entrepreneur and industrialist who, of course, is famous for creating the world's first production car, the Ford Model T. This is an interesting story. This is, look at this, a chassis made basically out of wood and with a radiator that looks like it came from an early, or something that should be in your house to heat your house. And that big block over there is a massive 4-cylinder engine. This is built in 1902. This is basically a racing car that Henry Ford built, but it was probably so scared he was reluctant to drive it, and he hired a bicycle racer named Barney Oldfield to drive this. This is the size of the pistons that's inside that engine. Looking at this, it's huge, all right? I mean, like my hands, if I'm going to go up that. 4 of these is 20,000 cc. That's 20 liters pumping out 80 horsepower at 700 RPM. This is a machine that didn't even have a steering wheel. This is basically grapple both sides. You needed to be Schwarzenegger or Conan the Barbarian to have driven one of these. But this is something that he did as a test. And it's apparently a finely built replica, of course, of the original machine. Never seen one of these before. It's just amazing. You come here, take time to study the details. Even there, look at that. The differentials is just very raw. It's exposed, not in a casing, not in a gearbox. Even all these gears, you see how just raw this driving machine is. And then we're gonna come here to this blue car. You notice something, there's a color scheme going on. You have the green of the British, it's called British Racing Green. This is the blue of the Wench. Over there is the silver of Mercedes-Benz, that's German. And during the Grand Prix or the racing of this time, it was basically a national color thing for automobile manufacturers to selected by the government to send their manufacturers into racing. And so France took the honor of having the blue. Bugatti, of course, famous for their extremely fast Veyrons, supercars, but they started sort of humbly around this time. This is the Bugatti Type 35B, 1926, and they won many races, and this is their version of the race car. Get this, this is a 2.2 liter single cam, but with a supercharger putting out 130 horsepower for 1926. Of course, the weight was like something like 800 kilograms, and this was a touring car at that time that would win the Targa Florio. Let's have a look at this. Big engine, very light chassis. The wheels seem to be an improvement over the bicycle spoke wheels. These apparently were one of the first, maybe the first lightweight aluminium wheels pioneered by Bugatti. This is how the first sports wheels look like, basically. So interesting. Aerodynamics at the time, well, consisted nothing of more than a boat tail shaping into a little sharp edge. With everything inside that, you had the suspension, going into the body. Very simple, but it worked. And it must have taken real men to drive one of these things. You sat in there, that little cockpit. You can imagine how hot it is. And obviously these things do not steer as well as cars today. There's no such thing as differentials. Not even the safety. Helmet wasn't a thing. They hadn't thought about these things yet. Seatbelts, I don't even see seatbelts inside. Drive under this around the corner and they get thrown off. And of course, it resulted in a couple of deaths, and so, they started to improve things. Which brings us to this legendary Mercedes-Benz racer over here. Mercedes-Benz, if you know the name Silver Arrows, this is one of the first famous race cars called the W25. This is a replica from 1935. And the interesting thing about why Germany, at that time, their racing color was white, but it turned into silver, is because racing regulations at that time required that these cars should be about 750 kilograms. And the car with the white paint was 1 kilogram over this limit. So the night before the race team just stripped all of the paint, bare metal, bare silver, and that took victory, and it became Germany's racing color, the silver. This Mercedes-Benz was also a DOHC supercharged 3.3 liter engine, giving a massive, at that time, 354 horsepower, single-seater. This is loaned from the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Germany, and various other cars would follow. Audi, which came from the auto unit, it's not here, but it's a similar race car of Germany's racing history. And it's basically Germany, Italy versus France, America, and UK. Japan really didn't have any race cars until a man came, Soichiro Honda, who started his company based on two-wheeled motorcycles. Now this man, as you know, then decided to build racing motorcycles all of a sudden and enter his motorcycles into the Man of Isle TT race in 1961. This is the RC, C standing for cycle, 162. It was a motorbike driven by the late and legendary respected Kunimitsu Takahashi in the Road Race Championship. And it was also the first victory for both Japanese maker and Honda for 250cc races. There's another one in the Honda collection, but this is a replica. You can just very bare metal style, the sort of cafe racer with a fairing. And with the success and the sales from their motorcycles, Honda in 1960, late 1965, decided, hey, they're going to enter into four-wheel racing using all of their motorcycle technology. And fast things forward a little bit, they created this thing called the RA272, which is the car that racing driver Richie Ginther drove and won the Mexican GP. After a couple of tries, one failed car, but this is the one that's very celebrated. You see this in models. By this time, already they had put in things like the 1960s was so far advanced from the 1920s that after the war, of course, Japan was coming out of with defeat and trying to revive the economy. Honda, Toyota, Nissan were the companies that came up and made different cars. But Honda was a rebel in the engineering way and also re-engineered the company. He decided to just go all out and make an F1 car, and would later gain victory, which would then put Honda on a path to create cars that were racing based. Let's have a look at this. The engine is amazing. Let's look at that exhaust going out there. Count how many there are. There are 12 because this is a V12 dual HC 1.5 litre engine. That was the regulations of the F1 at that time, putting up 230 horsepower and double wishbone suspension. You can see the early F1 cars, how there's no aerodynamics, there's no wing. You see how even the engine is mounted, not even longitudinally, and the engine was just coming, exhaust coming out straight from the top. You see massive axles that had a, this is not even an example of a CV joint. It was just a normal flex joint. You had a long upper wishbone and small unequal length double wishbone on the bottom. The design was supposed to be easy for mechanics to repair also, achieve a lot of success. Meanwhile, Toyota, by the way, the whole reason why this museum exists in the first place is because Toyota President Akio Toyoda loves cars, loves motorsports. As you know, he created the GR brand, and he said, let's make a facility for everybody to enjoy, and very generously also, wanted to make us understand and learn motorsports history, not only of Toyota, but of everything as we've seen so far. But it's important to also understand where Toyota started in their motorsports history. Here he is, the son of Sakichi Toyoda, Kiichiro Toyoda, which of course is grandfather of Akio. In 1950s, decided that in order to improve cars, they needed to go racing. And despite the economic crisis at the time, he decided, because his company was already doing well, coming from making automotive sewing looms, and then making this first Crown. This was a racing car called the Toyo Pet Racer. Actually never raced, but it was an 800 kilogram car based on what was kind of a very orthodox sort of race car that he wanted to try. And it's got a water-cooled 1000cc engine and 27 horsepower. Unfortunately, the original car was dismantled and didn't exist. This is a replica made by Toyota technicians by using original techniques, not modern techniques of whatever they could find during that time to replicate this as it would have been made in the 1950s. Looks something straight out of Speed Racer anime, quite similar to what the Europeans were creating, but just something of the 1960s. Looks like something like you would see in an early space age Apollo film or something. It had, an airplane feel to it. There's this very interesting looking rudder over here. Not sure what that is, but looks like it's gonna fly. Maybe it could transform into a plane. But anyway, Toyota started with this, and they wanted to go into LeMans. You see upstairs, connected to the Toyota 7. Over here is an example from Nissan. That's their export brand, as many of you would know. What is this doing here? It's got the Australian flag and the Japan flag on it. Obviously looks like a rally car. Mobigas trial round Australia. There was a crazy rally to run the toughest roads in Australia, basically going one whole round around the country. 17,000 kilometers, and to even finish, to survive, was already testament to the team and their efforts. And Toyota also entered their Toyopet Crown after that. But this little Datsun, in 1958, they were the first to enter this Mobigas rally. And the flowers you see are the Sakura. They will actually enter two cars. One was called Fuji and the other called Sakura. The Fuji is being kept at the Nissan Museum, and they loaned Toyota the Sakura version. Also, you see here, restored. The Datsun 210 was a very early version of like the Sunny, which later would spawn other models. And this was where Toyota and Nissan were selected by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to push their vehicles into the foreign market to prove itself in motorsports, in order to sort of like also promote Japanese cars as for sale. Now, all of these cars you see here are basically competition cars, the roots in various parts of motorsport history, coming from the Europeans, and now you see Japanese cars are starting, really from the 60s to really come up and compete against Europe, to show that, even though they copied and refined a lot of designs from the Europeans and learned from them, they could effectively make good cars. Which brings us to this interesting car over here. You might see it from the rear and looks kind of like a Americanish, European-ish design. And no, it's not a Toyota, it's not a Nissan, not a Honda, not even a Mazda. This is a Hino. Hino, as you know, if you heard the name, makes trucks. But at one point in time, they made this beautiful car called the Contessa. It was actually Italian design. And they had a tie-up with Renault Corporation to help them assist with the engine. And 750cc, very light, and it's much smaller than you think it looks. The Hino Contessa interestingly, the engine was not here, it was at the back. It was an RR, like a 911. This is an example of one of the race cars. All the stickers that you see on the front covering the glasses to prevent it from breaking. And just to even see a Hino Contessa in anywhere is very rare. This is obviously restored. You can see these vents over here, that the engine is at the back. Very interesting. Now, RR cars do have an advantage with handling, especially in those days when suspension, especially in the front, is still not as well sorted as later on. And this is one of the favored ways to create a kind of sports sedan. You could say that the Hino Contessa was kind of like one of the first Japanese sports sedans, along with this Skyline. Then we come into these two very space age-like races. This is the Toyota 7, which actually raced, and its rival, the Nissan R382. From this point, Nissan and Toyota would then become fierce rivals in different types of racing, in prototype racing, in rally, in Grand Prix racing. You see the Prince Skylines over there. But these, of course, were not built entirely on their own, but the Toyota 7 has an interesting story. You see Yamaha and Daihatsu. Basically, the story is that Yamaha assisted with making the V8 engine, and this was the second time they cooperated with each other after doing the Toyota 2000 GT. The aerodynamics, you can see the big difference. The Toyota has a huge wing, whereas the Nissan has a smaller wing. It was also due to some, various regulations at the time, and Toyota was able to put this wing. The wind tunnel testing, which already started at this time, was collaborated with Daihatsu, which already became a Toyota subsidiary. But what's interesting is that while the engine was kind of designed and Japanese built, the gearbox, we're going to have a look here, is a Hewland British-made gearbox, made in England. You can see here in the case, and it's actually the same gearbox used in the Nissan as well. This is the start of when, kind of LeMans car started to have very wide rear tires for traction. This thing had a lot of horsepower, was very light for its age. They found a little bit of success. This was kind of the early days of prototype racing, which then, of course, would develop to what we're going to see upstairs. So the Japan Can-Am was kind of based on like an American style. 1969, it was driven to the World Championship by Minoru Kawai, and it was the first victory for a Japanese manufacturer in this category. So it also coincides with the history of Fuji Speedway itself becoming a full-fledged circuit that could hold world events. Now I'm going to go to the second floor now and have a look. So here we're on to the second floor. This is one of the legendary Porsche race cars. 1964 was the 904 Carrera GTS on loan from Germany. This, as we can see here, DOHC flat 8 engine. So Porsche is very well known for making flat 6 engines, but this was a 2-liter flat 8 engine with 240 horsepower. And the 904 Carrera GTS was lightweight with a small frontal area, and this would also make the early designs for their prototypes that would also go on to win the 1964 Targa Florio. And to understand what this race is, in Italy, there is an important race that already existed from the early 20th century, 1906 to 1977. They were basically sort of like the forerunners of rallying cars, which were of road specification with a number plate, and they would run on normal roads. Unfortunately, a lot of accidents happened, and it was then later, banned, and the Mille Miglia, which is still held today, would later become a classic car race. One of the important European cars that would also inspire a lot of the design and engineering is this red car of Italy. Before Ferrari, you had Alfa Romeo in the 1930s 1750 Grand Sport. This is where the granddaddy of all Alfa Romeos, the 75, the 155, 156, Giulietta, this elegantly beautiful bright red. Red was the color for Italy. Started right here. Inline 6 engine UHC, and is very competitive enough that when Enzo Ferrari left the team after his tenure at Alfa Romeo, he started Ferrari based on his experiences with Alfa Romeo. Next, we come to a very interesting and not so well-known French maker called, I have to pronounce the name, Chisitalia 202, handmade, nice, beautiful curves, 1947. OHC overhead engine, 1 liter, 55 horsepower. The engine was not what mattered with this car. It was just its beauty. So this is an Italian car, not French, sorry. It's obviously an Italian name. But just check out that form. This over here is actually an early form of signal. There was no lights, and so this was a mechanical sign. It would actually pop up left and right if you wanted to have a signal. And the fastback body with covered half covers, just beautiful. I'm going to find out more about this car and maybe make a video on it. This is Stalia. Now over here is what is maybe my best knowledge, the road to WRC. Going to start here with the Mitsubishi Lancer, first generation rear-wheel drive GSR, Joginder Singh. He was one of the first rally drivers with Mitsubishi to win the 1974 Safari Rally, which was very difficult, known as the car breaker for its arduous conditions. The Lancer managed to overtake more powerful cars like the 911 Porsche, which was competing at that time, and works driver Kenjiro Shinozuka and Andrew Goh, who later founded Rally Art, would then take this and lead on to Mitsubishi's future activities, of course the Turbo Lancer EX. I want to show you something here very interesting. There are these little brackets, and they're not actually parts for rally. What is this actually used for? Very interesting. For the answer, we have to go to this Datsun Nissan Violet. It was the forerunner and also share the same base as the Bluebird. So all these were rear-wheel drive at that time. 2-liter DOHC engine, of course, by 1981, they already had this kind of technology. 150 kilowatts, which is 210 horsepower, big fog light systems as it is, loaned from Nissan. That number plate is the export style number plate. A lot of damage around here. It It was a car that Nissan used for many competitions. The Safari Rally was rivaling Toyota and also Mitsubishi. And you can see here how it's just wide fenders. You have these lightweight wheels, and they come to the back mud guards. The early just bolted on, and you see handles on top of the trunk, and the same little kind of brackets or damage here. This is actually when the co-driver would come and stand on this, grab those handles, and try and give more weight to push the rear-wheel drive car down to give it more traction in order to get out of loose surfaces. That was just how some of the extreme conditions are. Of course, that wasn't necessary when we came into the four-wheel drive. From after that, then you had the heavy Group B, and then coming into Group A over here, the Safari Rally car, Toyota's pride and joy, ST185. There's an example driven by Juha Kankkunen, and there's another one driven by Tain President Yoshio Fujimoto, fully restored. This is perhaps one of the most successful Toyota rally cars. 3S GTE engine, four-wheel drive. By this time, a lot of advancement, and you see over here inside the spare tire and the safety fuel tank. And by this time, car makers could make a lot of advancement in the four-wheel drive technology. A lot of electronics were used in making active torque split, and the Celica had something called a hang-on clutch, which allowed it to shift from four-wheel drive to two-wheel drive as when is needed. The ST185 also represented the most successful Japanese Group A car. It took 5 wins, including manufacturers and drivers' titles, which then the winning streak will be continued by other Japanese car makers such as Subaru and Mitsubishi. And here we have the Subaru Impreza WRX, the GC8, the first generation. Group A, driven by Colin McRae. This is the Group A era, called the Impreza 555, as you know. Along his other teammates like Carlos Sainz, many drivers did drive for Subaru. This would be the first rally championship, manufacturers championship in 1995 for Subaru and Pro Drive. That would set the stage after Toyota had started to win WRC, already beating the legendary Lancia Integrale. Here then was also when Mitsubishi and Subaru would start to really get into the late 90s, where everyone who likes JDM, of course, knows these cars. I grew up with them, and this was also what kind of pushed me into getting into WRC. The Lancer Evolution 3 Group A, Mitsubishi never really kept a lot of their cars, so this is one of the cars that they still had after the first championship win by Tommy Mäkinen. You can see it's not really restored. Group A cars have the special regulations where even though the engine specifications had to be kept as original, they could do a lot of modifications, especially you can change a lot of the arms underneath. As long as you don't move within 2 millimeters out from the original mounting points, you could change the suspension material, and this would be the last until the Lancer Evolution 6. By 97, they already be running the WRC regulations, which is until now. And then the museum started to go back into history. This is a 1930 Bentley. Bentley, of course, was a luxury car maker, and large British car. From the early age of when cars at that time was still developing the body and chassis, still using ladder frame. They hadn't done monocoque yet, but this is a massive inline 4 at 4.3 liters, so not even V8. Kind of like a truck engine, 110 horsepower. But this car was important because it won the LeMans 24 race for the first time in 1923. So Bentley won the victory also and started to achieve other victories later on, and with his rival Rolls-Royce. But this car would go into the annals of British motoring history and also contribute to what will come afterwards, like Jaguar and Aston Martin. And then over here, it goes into the modern day age of Le Mans. There's a little hall here, which is very nice. There's like a theater. You come in here and you can really see just the spotlight on these two cars. Of course, you have the very famous Mazda 787B. This is a replica, by the way. Of course, this is the only real international motorsports win for Mazda in 1991 before it supposedly got banned. It was not really true. We'll go into that story another time. Using 4 rotors, 2.6 liter If you're a Mazda fan, you must know this car, you must love this car. But I want to take attention to Toyota's then modern Le Mans Challenger called the TS020, which was the forerunner of the then later, more modern day successful Le Mans cars. Le Mans cars are actually prototypes, as you know, as based on the pipe frame chassis. And this, in 1999, actually was also developed by TMG, which was an advanced form of TTE. And just to show that progression of history and how Toyota as a motorsports participant, started to put their hands into everything. So they had WRC, they had Le Mans, and in 2002 started a F1 program. The first Japanese manufacturer to actually go into building everything from the chassis, the engine. They put a lot of effort to try and compete. Didn't get any really great results, but all of the research done during this exercise of trying to make F1 Motomachi factory, F1 cars had to be developed in a year compared to normal cars, which are over a span of 4 years. You have to develop everything from aerodynamics, special materials, and especially to conform to regulations of F1, which of course change every year. It's just a crazy thing to help them to also develop things like carbon fiber, which will also lead them to the manufacture of the LFA. Here's a display of Yamaha's 5-valve engine, as you know, which they contributed to use in the 20-valve 4AG, but came actually from their motorcycles and also use it in high-level racing engines like this V6 DHC 5-valve 330 horsepower. Very rare to see a Yamaha engine here. Of course, Yamaha has a good partnership with Toyota. So the last legs here, a little bit more. Here we have one of the early Fuji Speedway races by Suzuki Aguri. And over on the wall there, you see how the shape changes from the 1960s. It became a bit more, then more. It's sort of like a more less higher speed, and it's something into what it is today. This is another well-known Toyota race car, the A70 Supra Fujitsu 10. It's a Group A circuit racer that rivaled the Skyline GTSR. You can really see how large the diameter of these tires are compared to the road car. These Group A cars needed to have a homologation model, and that was actually the 3-liter 7M GTE called this is not even the 1JZ at this time. The road car, of course, now is very valuable. Everyone wants this. And then the Group A, on loan from Nissan, is a R33 early JGTC car from 1998. By this time, already inside was a pipe frame chassis, and this you can see in Gran Turismo, Pennzoil, which of course, more people maybe remember it for the R34 using the RB26. Are we back online? So unfortunately, before the camera's battery ran out, I wasn't able to cover one last car in the museum. It's the Toyota 2000 GT. Not the production version, but this is actually a replica of their pre-production speed trial run car. It's here, and before they produced this, they ran a series of endurance trials in order to prove its reliability and speed. Of course, competing with the European cars of that time, Toyota was determined to make this into a worthy GT. And of course, now it's worth a lot of money these days. The car on display here was a replica because the original car was lost. It was a time when they first started collaborating with Yamaha in order to make this inline-six 2-liter DOHC engine, which also produced 200 horsepower in race trim, 150 in the production versions, a space frame, and something very exotic for its time, and would go on to win the Grand Prix and be the foundation of Toyota's motorsports. So very interesting to see how this has been faithfully reproduced, and if you do come to this museum, this is definitely one of the cars to check out. And going through this entire collection really brought a sense of appreciation for the history of not only Japanese cars, but the automobile industry, as you can see from all these European cars here, and something that I had to study myself a lot and more deeply interested as a car enthusiast to see how it all began and the connection of motorsports to this Fuji Speedway is right next door, and there's a nice hotel and you can stay here. So I really recommend that you check this out. So until next time, I'll look forward to more videos we're going to be producing. Well, this is basically now my independent thing. So catch you guys later. Peace out.